What is up, everybody? And today we are going to do an empire tier list. Now, if you guys have been around the channel for a while, you may have known that I already did make this video, but it's been around like a year, and we learn new things over that year, which is why I'm making this updated version of the empire's tier list. So, this time we're making things a little different. F tier, since these are all empires, technically, they all did the same thing. They just conquered other lands. But some of them, like the ones that you've probably never heard of, they're so irrelevant that like you're gonna have to put them in F. So like, let's just start the video. The Abbasids. So we know about the Abbasids, right? Golden Age of Islam. That's solid. I'll put them in solid A. They controlled a lot of territory. Abbasid Caliphate, as you can tell here. Yeah. So third caliphate succeed Muhammad, marked by dependence on Persian bureaucrats. However, eventually they kind of fell down after the Seljuks came around and because of weakening in the empire. But it did bring about a golden age in Islam, especially in terms of the sciences. So we're going to put them in A just for that. Achaemenids we're putting in A. A lot of people like to talk crap about the Persians because they lost to like the Greeks and Alexander the Great, but Cyrus the Great basically invented the rights of man. Plus, they were the first empire to really kind of deserve the title of empire, to be honest. They conquered the most land at the time, united pretty much all of the Middle East and parts of Anatolia and Egypt as well. So, the Achaemenids are going to be an A tier. So, Majuran Sultanate. Let me see. I don't even know what that is. Majuran Sultanate. So, it's down here. They did establish some trade. They resisted the Portuguese. Hydraulic Empire. Water. Okay. They're not bad. They don't sound that bad, but I gotta put them in E tier because they did not do that much to affect the world. Same thing with Axum. I'm pretty sure Axum I'm putting in F tier. And the Ashanti. Like, I've never even heard of these. Like, they likely did not have that much of an impact on global history. Assyria was actually pretty important for their time. So I'm putting Assyria. I don't know. Assyria was not better than the Abbasids or the Achaemenids, so I'm just going to put them in B tier, but they were ahead of their time. If you go to here, you look at the Assyrians, they were a brutal empire, but at the same time, they had a very advanced military. They had fearsome soldiers, innovative, they used chariots, iron weapons, siege equipment to dominate their enemies. So they were ahead of their time, but eventually they got overthrown by Babylon. Okay, next we have Austria-Hungary. Like, I'm pretty sure all of you World War I buffs know about Austria-Hungary being the lesser part of the Central Powers. And to be honest, Austria-Hungary was not that great. They were powerful, yes, but they were not necessarily the best. And especially compared to like some of the empires on this list, they are not that high. I mean, they're better than like these ones, but they're not up here. Austrian Empire. I always get it mixed up between the Austrian Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. I'm guessing the Austrian Empire was basically the predecessor. Oh, so this was the basically the successor state of the HRE after the Habsburgs got kicked out by Napoleon. They weren't that, I don't know, I can't really tell. These guys, compared to some of these ones on the list, they're not that, Austrians weren't that great, but they were better than Austria-Hungary. So I'm putting them in D. The Eubaids, I know who these guys are. They were the sultanate that ruled Egypt from the Middle Ages, I believe. Putting them in the C tier, like they were compared to Abbasids, Achaemenids, and the Assyrians, they were not that great. Aztecs, it's kind of hard to judge the Aztecs and the Mayans and those like Central American empires, because like they were like really good in their area until the Europeans came, who were technologically more advanced and had smallpox. So I can't really tell. So I'm gonna have to just put them in D tier. D tier. Like they weren't like terrible or anything. It's just that, situation is a situation. Now, when it comes to Babylon, I'm not sure which Babylon they're referring to, because there were two Babylonian empires. There was the Neo-Babylonian Empire. There's even a Neo-Assyrian Empire, actually. There's a second, or the Chaldean Empire. But there's also like the Babylonian Empire, or Babylon. But I'm guessing this is just going to refer to Babylon, ruled by Hammurabi. Okay, so, or we can just include both. Babylon was pretty solid. Belgian Empire. I'm pretty sure I've heard. Was the Belgian Empire the one that colonized like the Congo? Belgian, yeah, yeah, the atrocities in the Belgian Empire. Yeah, the ones that they controlled the Congo, and they did all kinds of atrocities there to gain wealth while hiding it from the rest of the world. Yeah, the Belgians. But other than that, they didn't do anything. They're not much. I'm gonna have to put them down here. They're not like extremely terrible or anything, but I, they just didn't do that much. Empire of Brazil. Once in a while, I need like a little refresher. There's so many different names and empires. Like you have to understand. It's very interesting. Okay, so like it came out of one of the people who fled from Napoleon's conquests. I'm putting them in C tier. Okay, British Empire, we gotta put them in the S tier. Simply, well, there's really no understatement when it comes to them. British Raj. British Raj was just a colony. Although they did conquer some land, but like, I gotta put them in D tier. Bulgarian Empire. The Bulgarians had an empire? Um. Okay, so it was pretty short-lived though. They had two of them when they like fought the Byzantines, but they were quite short-lived. So I gotta put them in D tier. Burmese empires. They controlled like Southeast Asia, but not much. Byzantines. Okay, this is a tough one. I don't like when people refer to them as Byzantines. Just put Rome. Like you don't need to split them off. They're the same. Byzantine and Rome are the exact same thing. It's really difficult when people use the word Byzantium. It kind of takes me off because it's literally the exact same thing as Rome. Just the eastern half that survived, because the western half fell, but the eastern part survived. But Byzantium, I believe, it survived for like 1,000 years, if I'm not mistaken. Byzantine Empire. Yeah, it's literally the Eastern Roman Empire, or the continuation of the Roman Empire in its eastern provinces. So they can just call it. They can just group it with the Roman Empire. You don't need to like separate it because they're the same exact thing. It's just, yeah, they lasted for quite a long time, like more than 1,000 years. So like, even though like, yeah, they lost a lot of battles. The Byzantines lost a lot of battles to the Arabs and everything. Like you can tell here. So yeah, the Byzantines lost a lot of land, but they held it. They held on. You gotta admit, like no other. A lot of these other empires, they lasted for maybe only, sometimes like 100 years or less. But the Byzantines lasted for at least 1,000 years. So you gotta give them that. So Carthage. Carthage is kind of difficult because they were actually pretty powerful until Rome came around. Like they had their. I'm putting them in B as long with its Assyrian map because Carthage was also pretty ahead of its time as well. It's quite a maritime empire. Chola Empire. Put him in E. Or actually, no, put him down here. pretty irrelevant. Danish empires. Danish empires. Danish empire. Okay, so they had some land, but like they were just another European. They were C tier. Durrani Empire, I don't know, F tier. The Dutch were actually pretty good. Putting them up in B. They had a lot of colonies everywhere. They had a maritime empire. Ancient Egypt. I gotta give the homeland of civilization itself, other than Mesopotamia, of course. Ancient Egypt gotta go up here. Fatimids of Egypt, gotta put them in C tier. Frankia. Let's see, Frankia. Frankia. Kingdom of the Franks, or the Frankish Empire. So we got Frankish expansion over here from the reign of Clovis to like Charlemagne's conquests. To be honest, the Franks were actually pretty. Yeah, look at this. But like after Charlemagne died, it kind of just fell apart. Yeah, see, I gotta give him like maybe a solid B tier. French colonial empire. There's like multiple French empires on this list, right? There's like the Napoleonic one too. Colonial Empire of France, I gotta give him here. Put him up in the S. Georgian Empire, I gotta put him in F tier. German Empire. This is World War One German Empire. I gotta put him in the. They did more than Austria-Hungary did. I'll have to admit. So put him in D tier. Ghaznavids. Who are the Ghaznavids? Who are the Ghaznavids? Ghaznavids. Okay. It's pretty solid, actually. And keep in mind that this is based on how much history I know. Like, I don't know every history. I know a lot of history, I'll admit that, but I don't know every single Persian dynasty. Like, look at all this stuff. I do not know who these guys are. They seem pretty solid, but kind of got overthrown by a different one, so I'm gonna put them in just this. They're kind of just like the Eubaids and the Fatimids, but in Persia. Now the Gok Turks are nomadic. Gotta put them in C tier. Golden Horde controlled Russia for a while, which isn't easy to do. Put them here. The Gupta Empire. They were actually pretty strong because they held together India for some time. Han Dynasty. I don't know. Should I put the Han Dynasty in S tier or A tier? Because they were probably one of the best dynasties. I gotta put them in S tier. The Han Dynasty, my favorite Chinese dynasty. It's a little biased towards the other ones, but in any case, Hittites, I gotta put them in B tier. They're just like Assyria and Babylon. They were quite ahead of their time in terms of chariots. Okay, so now we get into like the good stuff. We got the HRE. That's kind of a subjective choice here, but I gotta admit the HRE was an empire, but at the same time it was not. And people are gonna. This is gonna be very controversial because how long did the HRE last? It lasted for quite a while, if you include like Charlemagne's coronation. But at the same time, like it wasn't really an empire. Like you can tell. Like look at this. Like this looks cool, of course, but like it eventually turns into this, and then like this. Yeah. So like it wasn't very stable as an empire, so, but it lasted. So I gotta put him in C. Like it lasted, even though it was such a decentralized empire. It lasted. So I gotta give them credit, but just because they're so decentralized. Alright, the Huns, I gotta put you in D tier. You were going well, and then Flavius Aetius beat you at Catalonian plains, and then kind of collapse after that. Inca. I'm putting Inca in C tier. Italian Empire, gotta put in like the F tier. I'm sorry. It's just that you're in the same tier list as Rome, and like there's a huge difference. Japan. Gotta put Japan in B tier. Like they had a rapid expansion. If only they didn't fight the US, they could have held on to that territory. Khazar Cognate, just another nomad. Khmer. The Khmers were actually quite a power in Asia, so I'm putting them in here. Korea, I'm going to put you in E. Macedonia, okay, this is a difficult one because Alexander the Great conquered so much land within such a short amount of time, but then like his empire collapsed right after he died. So it's kind of a difficult decision. Like they're not S tier, but I don't know. Should I put them in A tier or B tier? I'm putting them in A tier just because of Alexander himself. Majapahit, they're pretty strong. I'm putting them in B. Like they were not, they weren't Macedon, they weren't Abbasid, but they were pretty good. Malacca, gotta put you in E. The Mali, E. Mamluks, C. These guys, I'm putting them all the way down. Mauryan Empire, gotta put them in A tier. Chandragupta, uniting India for the first time. Rome, you gotta go in S. It's pretty clear explanation, Rome lasted the longest, if you include Byzantium. Plus, they influenced all of Western civilization. Mayan empires, gotta put you in this D category. Mexican Empire. They're just like the Empire of like Brazil, to be honest. The Ming Dynasty, they were pretty solid. I'm putting them in A. Mongol Empire, I'll put you in S, just because you conquered so much land. I mean, like look at this land that they conquered within such a short amount of time. Not Mongols, Mongol Empire. Mongol Empire. Like, look at this rapid expansion. Pretty much conquered pretty much all of Asia. Look at this, and even parts of Europe too. They even reached like Ukraine. I probably shouldn't be saying that, but like, yeah. Morocco, put you in F. The Mughals, putting them in A. Napoleonic Empire, just like Macedon, they're led by a guy that wins a lot of battles and conquers a lot of land, but just can't hold on to it in the end. If they held on to it, they would be in S tier. Like, it literally took all of Europe just to defeat Napoleon. And it took them, like, how many times? Like, 6 times just to defeat the guy? Like, Napoleonic Wars. Like, it took them, like, it took all of this just to defeat the Napoleon. And it took them, like, 6 attempts. And, like, look how many men died, like, total. Like, if you, like, Napoleon kind of just broke the game, but then the developers decided that he was way too overpowered, so then they decided to get rid of him, just like Alexander. They like patched up Alexander by leading to his early death. North Sea Empire. Let me see what that is. I believe it's the the short-lived Viking Empire. Not North Sea Empire. Yeah, it was oh yeah, the conquest of Canute the Great. That didn't last. So putting him in a D tier. Oman. Sultan of Oman. Lives in Zanzibar now. Didn't do much. Ottomans. Okay. The Ottomans. This is going to be controversial because there are a lot of fanboys out there, Like, when you go to every history video, there's always these fanboys. Either fanboying, like, Byzantines and Ottomans and, like, all kind of nationalistic stuff. But, like, I'm putting the Ottomans in S tier because, I mean, they were quite a power. Like, Europe was so scared of them back in the day when they were strong. It's only after, towards the modern day that they began to weaken. Like, after Suleiman died, it began a slow decline. But it was basically like a Muslim version of the Roman Empire, to be honest. Like, I know that's going to upset a lot of people, but it was quite power. And they were one of the most powerful states at their time. Like, if to be honest, like they could have probably conquered Italy if they had done it correctly. But Parthia, I'm putting Parthia in D tier. Yes, you defeated Rome in one battle. After that, you kind of fell apart. Poland, Lithuania. Poland and Lithuania is the Commonwealth. I like the Commonwealth. I'm putting them in B tier. Portugal is going up in A tier as well, because they had powerful trading empire. The Qing Dynasty, that's a difficult one. At their height, they were one of the largest empires in history. They controlled a very decent chunk of land. Look at this. It's more land than China controls nowadays, of course. But then, like, they kind of got shat on in the Opium Wars and in the Taiping Rebellion and then they got beat by the Japanese. So I'm gonna have to put them in C tier or D tier. They're not deserving of the same as Japan. At the same time, they weren't like terrible. Put them in like C tier. Like at least they controlled a decent chunk of land. We'll just keep it at that. Alright, the Russian Empire. Russian Empire, put them in B tier. Safavid Empire. What was the Safavid? Safavid Iran, I'm guessing. Oh, yes. The Safavids, one of the gunpowder empires. Oh, yes, I learned about this in history class in high school. Gunpowder empires, powerful Islamic empires using gunpowder. The Safavids were were they really like that good? Because from what I know, like they just get beat by the Ottomans like all the time. But they were part of the reason in the making of modern Iran. So I'm gonna give them a. They're better than the Qing Dynasty. I'll just give them that. Sassanids. They went toe to toe with the Romans for many years until like they got so weakened by the last war against the Romans that eventually the Muslims were able to come in and conquer them. But the Sassanids were basically a better buffed version of the Parthians. After the Parthians went through the Sassanid update, they became buffed, and it took literally the Muslims just to defeat them. So I'm putting them in not A tier though, maybe B tier. Seleucids. Seleucid Empire, successor state of Alexander the Great, the largest successor state. They controlled pretty much like the Persian lands. They were pretty strong, like they held on to it for a while, but then they were kind of unstable at the same time. Putting them in B tier, but they're better than the Qing. Just remember that if the Qing are basically the middle child here. The Seljuk Empire, putting them in B. Serbian Empire, probably going to go in C. Maybe D, actually, because it was pretty short-lived. Siamese Empire is here. The Sikh Empire here. Sikh Empire didn't control that much land anyway. Songhai, what? Is this supposed to be a city or an empire? Songhai. Oh, it was an empire. Songhai Empire. Oh, it was one of these. They were actually a pretty strong African empire. So, but they're not like, you know, they're not the Russians or the Safavids or the Babylonians. Spain. I gotta put Spain in the S tier. Srivijaya? Putting you in like maybe B tier. Because controlled Indonesia and you did pretty good there. Swedish Empire, put them in. Swedish Empire was pretty short-lived too, but better than the Qing. Tang Dynasty, A tier. Golden Age of China. Tibet, C tier. Timurids. Now this is a tricky one. They're kind of like the successors of the Mongols, but like in Persia, in the Islamic version of it. Put the Timurids in a Tuitonga. What's Tuitonga? The Tongan Empire. So it's basically this like empire in like the Pacific Ocean. I'm putting them in like C. Umayyads are an A tier. Vietnam? Was Vietnamese Empire of Vietnam was a thing. Ruled by Bao Dai. Final emperor of the Nguyen dynasty. Putting him in C. Or maybe D actually, to be honest. Not nothing special. Xiongnu, just another nomad. Yuan dynasty. Putting you in B tier. Actually no, maybe A. In Ethiopia, maybe D tier. So that's that for our empires tier list. The updated version. Did you see we have the S tier, or the greatest empires in history? Kind of already predicted. Then we got A tier, which were good empires. Then we got B tier, which were decent empires. C tier, mediocre empires. And in D tier, poor empires, or not that great. Then pretty bad, and then these are like pretty much at the bottom. So I hope you enjoyed, and if you have any suggestions as to why it would change, please comment below, because I'm learning new things about these historical scenarios just as much as you are. So see you all in the next one.